Welcome to ND and Me, a podcast to share NDers' lived experiences.
Hi, Charlie. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? Oh, that's a bit like neurotypical small talk, isn't it? How
Well,
did
it
that
is.
happen?
You know,
You want the
we
real
have to get
answer
there.
or the one that's socially acceptable?
You can have fine as long as you realise that is effed up, indecisive, neurotic, and emotional.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'll use that.
Brilliant. So, other than us both being fine, we're in a good place to have a chat today with Charlie. Charlie, talk to me. Who is Charlie?
Who is Charlie? Oh, that's a big question. So I'm a 40-something, I'll keep that vague, female, autistic ADHD, late diagnosed. I've worked in HR for over 20 years and specialised in diversity and inclusion for the last 5 years. I'm a neurodiversity advocate, but I'm not a happy, clappy, flappy evangelistic one. I'm quite a neuro-realist. So yeah, that's me in the middle.
So you're not a fan of the superpower narrative?
Oh God, no. And I'm not a fan of the purely strengths-based narrative at all, because actually, although we want to be included, we also have support needs and strengths and weaknesses and spiky profiles, and I think balance is really important.
And how much of your time and energy do you spend looking at that intersectional approach rather than just the neurodifference?
Yeah, quite a lot. So I'm bisexual and pansexual as well, and so are my kids. So I spend a lot of time and energy looking at the rainbow, the double rainbow intersection. So the double rainbow, if you haven't heard of that, it's when you're both neurodivergent and some flavour of LGBTQIA. So sexuality and gender are a spectrum, and so is being neurodivergent or particularly autistic. So if you have that neurodifference and you're LGBT as well, you could say that you're in two spectrums, so on a double rainbow.
And that's a little bit like the twice exceptional crowd.
Yeah, a bit like that, yeah.
Neurodifferent and exceptional.
Yeah, so I look at the fact that intersectionality is a thing and that humans are really complex and we're all a unique blend of not only our neurotypes, our physical attributes as well, but also our upbringing and our experiences. So every human is vastly different from any other. And you've only got to look at my own kids who come from the same gene pool, and they're such individuals with their own needs. One daughter's got severe sensory issues and really struggles with school for that reason. The others don't. So it's really important, while making the world of work and education and life in general as accessible to as many people as possible. It's super important to understand that people are individuals, and that's humanity.
And I lean into that quite a lot when I'm doing work in the neurodiversity space and the people management space. So there's a really old TikTok or YouTube short about a software developer doing quality assurance with those kids' boxes with shaped holes cut in the top.
Yeah.
And I love the video because the QA testers kind of like observing and commenting as this dad is putting shapes into the hole. And it's like, oh, this like half crescent, where does that go? The square. The rectangle, where does that go? The square. And after about 20, he's put them all in the square. And she's like, well, but you've got all of these other shapes, but you've pigeonholed all of them into the shape that they can fit into. And I use that as a really good analogy to talk about how we don't job design, role design for the needs and capabilities of individuals.
Absolutely.
So actually, if we had a spikier star instead of a circle, why are we trying to force the star through the circle? Look at all the gaps.
The only way you can force a star into a round hole is by knocking off all its pointy edges, and then it's just like everybody else. So you don't have any stars then, and no one can sparkle.
Or the hole's really, really big.
I'm thinking through this analogy as I go along.
Yeah. And, or the hole's bigger than the star.
Yeah.
And then you've got gaps.
Yeah.
Because you can't. Yeah. So I do a lot about person-centered people management. You know, why aren't you talking to the people in your team about where their spiky profile is, you know, where they might need additional support and where they can excel, and then give them roles and jobs and activities that they can strive and thrive in, because they've got the ability, the nous, the interest to not procrastinate and take 7 years to do anything.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I have had jobs where I've been gently helped to do the things that are less comfortable for me as well. And as long as that's a caring, nurturing approach and it's not met with fear, I think that's okay. So I talked to, for instance, an HR manager I reported to at the time about how I'm fine with in-person meetings, but I'm not very good at one-to-one phone calls. She wanted me to explain quite a complex issue. It was a holiday query to somebody in the London office by phone rather than email, because a previous email had been misunderstood. So I was like, oh, I don't think I can do that. I really don't like the phone. Do you know what? Although autistic people are supposed to be, we're supposed to apparently have differences with non-verbal communication. But if you take that away and it's just a disembodied voice, it's even harder for me. So she got me to practice that phone call, and then she sat with me and gave me encouraging nods. And it made a massive difference to my confidence, actually. So yeah, giving me the chance to lean into my strengths and avoid the things that make me really uncomfortable is great, but also I can be encouraged with a little bit of nurturing coaching to do those things that sit in between.
Yeah, I was reading a post recently about PDA, pathological demand avoidance, for those people who want to understand what acronyms are rather than us.
Pathological demand for autonomy, yes.
Yeah, all that. And one of the comments is saying, well, the problem is that by using the term avoidance and pathological, it's almost like an excuse rather than a framework or a request for change.
Yeah.
Actually, there is good evidence that exposure type therapies can actually help people move from their challenges towards something more productive. Don't know if that's the right word. By coaxing, coaching, giving them the opportunity to try it in a safe environment.
It's so difficult to get it right, though. I mean, one of the first things to understand, I think, is if somebody says this thing really stresses me or makes me really panic, to believe them. So sometimes we can too easily forget that other people don't experience things in the same way. So you look at, this is an outside of the workplace example, but my husband, who's also ADHD, he's pretty confident on the phone. So if one of our kids needs to make a phone call, he used to dial the number and then pass them the headset and say, talk. And you could just see the panic cross their face. Now that he knows about his neurotype and he's learning a lot more about what things he can and can't cope with and how different he is from other people, he's starting to say things to me like, I shouldn't have done that, should I? Because I was being really dismissive of how hard it was for them. I could have been more nurturing, and then he does. So I think a lot of managers need help how to really listen and understand people and take a nurturing approach like that.
And whilst I agree, I think that we also need to give space to those people with impulse control problems.
Yes.
Because sometimes they do things because they think that's the best thing to do, but actually in the long game, you've hurt the longer term need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
so I would have been judging him at the time because I didn't know he had ADHD. Yeah. Now I know a lot more about it. So
but
we have conversations where we make adjustments for each other, and we're quite compassionate about things that would have driven us mad a few years ago. It's probably saved our marriage, to be honest. But why not have a relationship like that at work as well with your manager?
Yeah, I'm quite subservient to my wife. I keep joking that I've got a bald spot for a thumb. But we met when
I'm glad you know your place. Yeah.
17 and 18. We had our first child when I was 20 and she was 19, and we've been together 20 years. So it's an interesting place. I think she's divergent. She doesn't want to be diagnosed.
I wouldn't assume she's neurotypical without rigorous tests to rule out any neurological conditions, because she's on the same wavelength as you to get on with you, then
there's
probably isn't tragically lacking autism.
But with that is this stereotype or stigma around the labels and the judgments associated with those labels. So we were emailing a consultant at the hospital about one of our kids yesterday, and I was like, just search for the department name, because the department name is in the email address. And I spelt ped as pediatric, with the A and the E the wrong way around. I'm sorry, but that's a really stupid way to spell ped.
Yeah.
And then she's insulting me and having a go at me for not knowing how to spell. It's like, okay, I failed my A-levels in part because I'm not very good at English. And that's probably because I'm dyslexic. So, you could have, when I said search for ped, just wrote ped, instead of me having to explain why I was asking you to search for it and telling you which letters to type, which then just gave you ammunition to throw it back at me because I'm an idiot. Do you diagnose dyslexic or just aware of it in hindsight? Well, so I only have a clinical diagnosis for ADHD. The clinical psychologist who undertook the assessment flagged me for a whole heap of other stuff. But at the time, that was a private assessment, and the other options were private assessments. Yes. So, I'm not paying £3,500 to add autism to my diagnosis, because the clinical psychologist who... It's not like you need medication for autism, so why bother? Yeah, absolutely. So, I've always hated reading. I've always been bad at spelling. But my English exams for my SATs, so the standardized testing that you have in the UK for year 4, year 6, and year 9, historically, they've changed it recently. I got the same score in English in year 6 and year 9. So I basically write to like an 11-year-old standard. So, well, why is that? Well, maybe because I don't understand complex words. Yeah, it's interesting. I still spell sense with a C. Yeah. I know that sense doesn't have a C. As I met you on LinkedIn, so this is the first time we've met face to face as such. So I've seen you writing blogs, and I know you as a writer, really. Grammarly is a great boon. Yeah. My first husband's dyslexic as well, or he was told he was borderline dyslexic at school, but he's really clever. He was definitely dyslexic. And he used to phone me up saying things like, I'm really stuck and spell check can't help me at this point. How the heck do you spell thorough? I don't even know where to start, and things like that. And he's a really senior program manager. Yeah. And I think a lot of dyslexic kids were made to feel thick at school, so it's better if we could not do that when they're adults. Yeah. Tough through thorough, thoughtful. Yeah, it's all of those OUGHs in the wrong place. Just bung some G's and O's and U's and hope for the best. Absolutely. So I watched another short or TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but lots of people post TikToks on YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. So in the mix. And it was a non-native English speaker trying to understand like how letters make sounds. So it's like, okay, so in this situation, a GH is an F. So like with laugh. Yeah. So laugh and tough is Fs, but thorough, well then it just kind of like elongates the vowel. It doesn't even, why is it even there? The English language is a proper melting pot. And I did linguistics at university. I only lasted a year at university. I was a disaster. But I was doing French, German, and linguistics. So you really like language?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. But as I say, I only lasted a year. I was just bright enough to get through school and get fairly good grades while doing zero homework.
Yeah.
And just being able to really apply myself and also remember what teachers said to me, because I've got a really retentive memory. But as soon as I was at university, unsupervised, imagine me without adult supervision and nobody knowing about any of my issues. They just see that I'm clever and quite brash and self-confident and think I'll be fine. I wasn't fine at all. So, yeah.
No, I started taking my eldest daughter to tabletop RPG night. We run a local club as a non-profit. We pay a couple of quid a night and hire a library and stuff. And then in the constitution it says all minors have to be accompanied by a responsible adult. And the in-joke is that she's not, because I'm not a responsible adult.
Yeah.
Adult supervision when you have to adult for yourself, that's a whole other ballgame.
Oh yeah. It still beggars belief to me. I knew my parents they had a lot of faith in me, shall we say. So the expectation was I was clever, I got a genius IQ and everything, that I would go off to university, but so ill-equipped. But my brother is quite severely disabled with, he's got autism, ADHD, learning difficulties, various things. There's no neat pigeonhole you could put him in. He's a fascinating man, but he required a lot of support and it was very difficult to put him in the right school. Yeah. Whereas I was the one with potential. And I hate that word. It's like not a death sentence, but yeah, it really sets you up to think, oh, I'm such a loser and a failure and a disappointment.
Yeah, I feel that some way because so I'm the youngest of three, but my dad only had me and my sister, so my mum had an older son. So up until 10 years ago, I was the golden child of the three because I'd achieved more academically than the others, and I was doing all right in life. And then my brother went and become an optometrist, so yeah, he's blown me out of the water now. But you know, there is something in that mix of trying to do your parents proud and how they interact with you because of what you've been able to achieve.
Yes.
And I don't know if guilt's the right word, but there's definitely some tension when I'm in the same room as my sister, who hasn't been afforded the opportunities in life that I have, and hasn't attained a working life relatively.
Oh yeah, my brother hasn't either. Well, he did have a job in a hotel for many years and lost that when it changed hands and the new owners didn't want to keep him on, and he's been looking for things ever since. But I really don't think that we should judge the worth of an individual by whether they can have a job and pay taxes and things. It really bugs me. But he's a fascinating man, my brother. But I'm definitely more privileged than he, because I'm able to do things that he would. I have struggled, don't get me wrong, but I've been able to get married and buy a house and have kids and drive a car and that kind of thing. So I am acutely aware of my privilege.
So knowing that there was difference in the family, what led you to being diagnosed so late?
Yeah.
Or do you think your brilliance just covered up, masked the difference?
I think that, I got through school. I did see an educational psychologist when I was about 11. And then my parents got divorced. And I think after that, everyone just assumed any problems I had were due to my parents getting divorced. Right. My dad has issues with addiction. He's recovered now. But at the time, I think people kept an eye on me, but it never occurred to them that a girl, a clever girl at that, would be autistic or ADHD. It's just not what it looked like in the early 80s. So I really fell off the rails at university, but eventually got a job in HR and did okay there. It was quite analytical what I did in HR. and I did all right. Didn't really rise through the ranks and probably didn't get the management progression that my parents might have expected, but I was doing well. And so it wasn't really an issue. But when my eldest child, Iggy, was 14, he was really struggling with anxiety states. So he saw a child and adolescent psychiatrist who talked to him. She spent a lot of time asking him what things felt like and how he reacted, rather than just accepting, oh, yes, that's an anxiety state. And her conclusion was, what he's describing, yes, he's anxious, but what's underpinning it is Asperger's syndrome, is what she said. But basically, she said he's autistic. And she said that when he talks about having an anxiety attack, and he mimed like cowering in a corner, like the ceiling is caving in on him. And when he described that, she knew that he was talking about something more extreme than an anxiety attack. It's actually an autistic meltdown. So me, with all the issues I've had with work and relationships and education and various things over the years, and a 15-year history of recurring depression and anxiety, my cogs were whirring. So I did a lot of research. I say research, I mean, I was on Twitter. I found the actually autistic hashtag, where there's lots of first-person experience accounts from autistic adults. And I felt even more like, yes, this is making things make sense. So I went to my GP, who said, can you go away and come back with a bullet-pointed list of reasons that you think you're having issues that might be autism, arrange it into communication problems, relationship problems, I don't know, something else. Because I'm really thorough, I went away and I came back with like 5 pages of bullet points. It had things like shutdowns and meltdowns in there as well, and sensory issues as well. And I didn't have sensory issues when I was younger. They kind of started to come about with hormone changes when I was pregnant with my oldest, and they've just got progressively worse over the years. But there was enough to write half a page about that. So he referred me. Oh, and I also mentioned being bisexual and quite adventurous as well. So he read this and he referred me to a psychiatrist, because he thought that the picture I was painting was one of somebody with borderline personality disorder. Yeah. So she assessed me, and I didn't know. She ran through that lengthy autism assessment questionnaire and missed out the bits that were aimed more at people that were non-verbal or had severe learning difficulties, but ran through most of that whilst observing my verbal and non-verbal communication, and then said to me, I did think it was borderline at first, but I've listened to you and watched you, and you're clearly autistic. So I got my autism diagnosis age 42, and suddenly there's a concrete reason why I was struggling for years with things my intellectual peers took for granted. So I was really happy to tell my manager and the rest of the team. I worked in HR, so again, that's a privilege. I knew my employment law, I knew the policies and processes, and I was pretty confident that I could tell my team and not worry too much about discrimination at that time. So I told them about the diagnosis and got congratulations. So, I've just had an email pop through from Psychiatry UK about my ADHD assessment. That's exciting. I can say it took a further 5 years to realise that I was ADHD as well. So, but meanwhile, the fact that I knew I was autistic and I could look back on my history of getting depressed, needing a month off work, going back stronger, I could look at what was happening at that time and identify that I was getting burned out and what the triggers were. And it was things like working on projects with conflicting priorities, being in meetings all morning and then training somebody one-to-one all afternoon without any time to myself, all these kind of things. So once I knew I was autistic, I was able to go through this period of introspection where I could say to work, this is what I need to be able to work like. This is what you need to know about me in order for me to thrive at work and do my best work and not go off sick and not leave. And yeah, I had another 4 years at that employer, which were brilliant. Again, I was privileged because I felt safe to disclose, and I've got the skills to advocate for my needs. So kind of the next step for me work-wise, really, I'm trying to help people advocate for their needs, to empower them and to basically spread awareness with employers that it's really important to listen to people and believe them and to work with them to find out the best way to work with individuals. And I want to tear up the Equality Act and throw it in the bin, because lots of people have needs and they don't all have diagnoses. You know, I don't think you should have to have a protected characteristic and medical evidence to prove it in order to be treated like a human being with individual needs at work. It's just a complete no-brainer. If you want someone to do good work and not go off sick all the time and not storm off with a meltdown and not resign, just find out what they need to thrive and deliver it, please. The pandemic has taught us a lot as well. So in that job I was in during the pandemic, we had a lot of working mums working at home. It was about 2/3 female, that organisation, and a lot of us were working parents. So suddenly we had the working parents network where we had a regular meeting, but there was a group chat as well, and lots of people struggling with the conflicting demands of being a mum or a dad and trying to hold down a job. So people really quickly learned self-advocacy skills, and employers really quickly learned that they needed to work with they needed to work around people and treat them like humans and not automatons. Otherwise, people were going to go burn out and go off sick and just look after their kids. So I've really rambled on there, but
no. You're more than welcome to. There's a couple of threads to tug on there. My laptop keeps wriggling every time I touch the desk, so apologies to anyone watching with shaky cam syndrome. So I think that we're on a journey when it comes to difference, and the Equality Act is better than DDA.
Yes.
And over time, I can see the Equality Act being further honed to enable individual difference and supporting individual difference. But so. for where we are, I'm kind of happy we've got it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's leagues above the Americans with Disabilities Act for a start, because you can't get that right to request accommodations and protection from employment discrimination without a diagnosis under the Americans with Disabilities Act, I understand. Whereas here in the UK, if the tribunal agrees that there's evidence that your employer knew that you had a disability, it doesn't have to be a formal diagnosis from a doctor. It comes down to, on the balance of probabilities, do I think that this employer knew that that person was working with a disability and needed that accommodation or whatever.
Yes,
I'm not legally able to give advice.
That's fine. For the last 8-9 years, I've worked in employee relations and conflict at work. So Section 26 of EA 2010 has been my friend for 9 years. So the UK's definition of disability is fluffy enough, woolly enough to cover quite a lot of people. Yeah. So, do you have a long-term condition that affects your day-to-day life?
Yeah.
Can you evidence that?
So long COVID, menopause, all kinds of things can fall under that.
Okay, well, what's day-to-day activity?
Got to know about it though as well, reasonably know. which gives people an issue if they don't feel safe to disclose.
Well, so some of those traits for ADHD is impulsivity. Those people tend to have more jobs. Okay, well, you hired this person and looked at their CV, and they had 14 jobs before they started working with you. So you had information that might have indicated that this individual ...
Yeah.
Okay, those people might be, those people with PDA or oppositional defiance might be more argumentative, more defensive. Okay, so you're dealing with employee relations types problems because these people aren't as civil or respectful as the norm. Okay, well, you've got these challenges in the workplace, so you've got evidence that there's something going on for them.
Yeah.
And if those relationships break down and they lose their job, then they have a long-term condition that has impacted their day-to-day routine, because having a job is a day-to-day thing. Managing relationships is a day-to-day thing. And you don't need to label what the condition is, just whether or not you've had it.
Yeah.
And, I've had, without looking on LinkedIn, I think I've got 20 roles on LinkedIn. That's not all of my roles, because some of them I'm so ashamed about I don't put on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Same.
I basically had a job every other year for the first 6 or 7 years of being together and having the kids. So each one of my children, their dad has a different occupation on their birth certificate. And I always dressed it up a little bit. So, I was a sales executive when my first son was born. Yeah, I was a weekend sales helper at a franchise car dealership. It was like my second ever job.
Yeah.
20 in 3 months. When my second son was born, I was a greengrocer. No, I just worked in the produce department of a supermarket.
Oh, just wait until I start writing about what I was up to when I left university, when I was kicked out of university. Yeah. I've not felt I can do that in many years working in HR, but now I'm self-employed. I'm definitely going to.
And then I went back to sales for my eldest daughter, and then I was in customer services for my youngest daughter. So, when I get into a role and I can succeed in the role, I stay.
Yeah,
so
that's why I was so long in my last but one job. I was there 17 years.
So we moved to this lovely little leafy village just outside of Cambridge, and there's some offices on the road into the village. And as we moved here, the wife said, it'd be really good if you got a job there. And 4 months later, I got a job there. And 3.5 years later, they made me redundant. And I was like, I can walk to work, and you're making me redundant. That's a little bit of me. And then, I then spent 2 years contracting, so doing interim roles. So every 6 weeks, I'm somewhere else doing something else. So I think I did 8 or 12 roles in 14 months, which is good, because that means that I've got a wealth of experience from looking at stuff from all of these different angles.
I could do with some of that myself, because that one of the reasons it took me so long to leave that job is because I'd got the fear of starting again and making a good impression. Yeah, I was working with people that knew that I was really good at what I did, and I would have to go somewhere new, and it just made me feel like some little girl swinging my legs under a big chair.
And that external validation to say, I am worthy. I wanted to write a blog this week. So we're recording on the Thursday of Inclusion Week, for those people who are going to watch this whenever they watch this. Because I've done quite a lot of soul-searching job hunting in the last 6 months. Because, I'm now 14 months into running Lemonade. And working for yourself's really hard. And actually having that camaraderie and strategic goal being worked on as a group of people is quite nice.
Yes.
And not being told what to do, but having a mutual aim to aim at is quite nice. So I was going to write something this week about discrimination and inclusion and the challenges of ND folk finding work. Because, I've come second in job recruitment rounds 4 times in the last 4 months. And I was like, well, there can't be that many people who keep like jumping over hurdles to get first in front of them.
Yeah.
So, you know, sooner or later, you need to sit down and have a conversation with yourself as to what's the why. You know, is there a pity party that gets me through the first couple of rounds because I'm known? You know, I had a very high profile person in our space.
Yes.
You know, give me some words of advice recently, and you know, but Richard, people do listen to you.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and they might not necessarily agree with everything I say. You know,
I think I get dismissed as being negative and a bit of a harbinger of doom because I'm such a realist. But yeah, I don't know how that would go for me if I was looking for an employed role now, because I've only had one since I left that long-term job.
Yeah.
And I was really upfront about being autistic, told them exactly why that makes me a good HR analyst, and they were super keen. They knew about my both my neurotype and my mental health issues. They're a mental health charity, so they weren't fazed by that. But trying to work for consistent days a week, every day, meeting really regular deadlines, however I was feeling, it was just too much for me. So hence I'm self-employed and I'm going with the flow. And if I have a week where I want to reminisce about my son and go for a long walk and things like that, and then write a lot of blogs about it, I will have a whole week doing that. And if it leaves me a bit skint, that's okay. It's going to leave me okay. I'm going to be able to put myself back together if I have a bad day.
Yeah, and that's sometimes self-care is far more important than putting freedom tokens in the bank account.
Yes, but only people with a certain amount of financial privilege would see it that way. But money's nothing to stress about unless you're really skint. So it's another thing I'm acutely aware of.
Luckily in the UK, we've got quite a good safety net. I've been saved by that safety net. And, you know, listening to all kinds of people in our space and wider about mental health challenges. Historically, I just put down silly thoughts to silly thoughts. You know, I'm feeling a bit down. Life's a bit shit. Nobody's going to come rescue me, but I need to pick myself up and get on with it. But then listening to other people talking about that type of stuff changes the framing. Yes. It makes it sound or hit harder, sound more severe. But you know, my wife's not well, doesn't work. And I've got 4 teenage kids.
Wow,
so
that's a lot.
You know, if my son wants to learn to drive for £85 for 2 hours, then I need some coaching clients.
Yeah.
You know, we've been okay. I wouldn't say that we've been extraordinarily lucky. And I've worked for some relatively good companies that have had my back until you cross too many bridges that get burnt. And, you know, they can be burnt by you and others. So,
I've had a lot of time since being self-employed to read a lot of things by my peers as well that's made things drop into place, and just how complicated the human psyche is. David Gray Hammond in particular has been tremendously helpful because he's written books about addiction and the moral model of addiction. It's a new thing to me. You know, I had a lot of problems with drink and drugs when I was younger. I'm still a bit of an alcohol enthusiast now, but just the realization that from reading one of his books that there are reasons that we self-medicate as undiagnosed, particularly autistic ADHDers, and that it isn't a moral failing. And I suddenly felt a lot better. Like reading that book was better than 10 hours of psychodynamic psychotherapy or something. Yeah. And then I start to, because it's run in my family as well, but then obviously neurotypes run in the family as well. So I have then time to go for a long walk and reflect on that. And that's just one example, but he wrote a piece with Tanya Adkin about trauma responses, and they introduced a phrase, meerkatting. And when I read that piece, I was like, oh God, that's exactly what I do. When I'm hypervigilant, I already knew about CPTSD and hypervigilance, but this imagery of someone that's on constant high alert, like a meerkat, seeing dangers everywhere, that is what I was feeling like while I was in that quite stressful, high pressured job, trying to make sure that everyone was paid correctly at the end of each month and things, and really being super responsible for things that were probably above my pay grade. Writing the blogs to make sense of what's whirring around in my own head, but also reading other people's work like that, and academic papers as well.
So for me, there's two threads I want to pull on. So the first is socialization and nurture versus nature, and the second, which ties into one of your early points about disclosing, and now about psychological safety. So I keep looking on the bookshelf because I thought I had Amy Edmondson's book up there, but I don't. So Professor Amy Edmondson is a Harvard professor who's done loads and loads of work in psychological safety and stuff. And that hypervigilance is more profound in those who have experienced trauma. And I can understand why there would be a proportion of a community that would be predisposed to paying attention. Yes. Because, a million years ago, when we're living in a cave, somebody needs to know that a tiger can hide in that bush and nobody else will see it but me. And that's the same reason why we have psychopaths in the community, because sooner or later somebody needs to go and do something that nobody else wants to do. And you need the mindset to be able to do that clinically without it destroying your ego afterwards.
Yes.
So I can understand why evolutionary we have some of the neurotypes that we have. So psychological safety, Amy talks a lot about how we view and manage risk, and a lot of the risks that we deal with we treat as the tiger, because we haven't evolved to the society where we are. Yeah. So when we fall out with somebody at work, some of us feel traumatized by that because we're going to lose our community, we're going to be destitute, we're going to be out in the wilderness starving.
That's exactly what I felt like. And when I left that job, it reminded me of when my first marriage broke down. And so not only did I leave my husband, I also cut off lots of people who I only knew through him. Yep. And it was just like that, leaving that job. But I never had any time to grieve, It's rushed straight back into another job, which was really under-resourced. And so I was constantly stressed.
And is that stress actually, again, self-medicating, because you're getting the adrenaline from dealing with stress? I was talking about it this week. I can't remember who I was talking to it about, but that pressure of always being under the cosh, always needing to do something, stops me falling asleep at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's the reason I get out of bed.
I'm really prone to adrenaline slumps. So I did a talk earlier this week, a freebie talks. They did me a nice video, but it was at the hospital in Birmingham. And I spent all day Monday until really late at night actually preparing for that. And then went and did the talk, which went great. I've got it on my YouTube now. And then went home and lay down for 2 hours. And I wasn't even asleep. I was just lying still in a darkened room, just feeling completely wiped out.
Yeah, just needing to rebalance. On Matt Gutwell's episode, all the way back in season 1 a year ago, he was talking about how he was in the entertainment industry and would go and do parties and stuff. And then on the drive home, he'd drive home with the windows open.
Yeah.
Just to get some white noise and some distance and some space, just to be able to change his mindset from the extroverted, high energy, I'm a performer, to, I'm coming home to look after autistic ADHD kids relatively late in the evening, and I do need to go to sleep tonight. So he also looks at masking in a different way, and almost reverses it. So actually, if you can't be your whole self when you're at home, then mask. So why shoulders there?
I've got so many masks.
That he really helped me solidify why I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Because I learn a lot from hearing other people. I don't want to listen to Dr. blah 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 18 letters after your name talk about the science behind why our brains do stuff. Okay, our brains have chemicals going through them and they make us do stuff. I get that.
Yeah, you don't need to know about the synapses and things.
But listening to the real experience, and I don't want to use the word struggle because that buys into that medical disability deficit model, but life's hard.
Struggles. Yeah, definitely.
And one of my favorite sayings is a calm sea never made a good sailor.
Yeah,
I'm bloody good at sailing. But not all of us have super yachts. Some of us have dinghies, and some of us are swimming. And sometimes the storm's worse for others. But I don't want to listen to Mr. Mate turning around saying ADHD isn't real and it's all about trauma in childhood.
And then armchair diagnosing, was it Prince Harry?
Yeah. There's quite a few clinicians that I rate highly because of the work that they're doing, who don't believe in ADHD. We're medicating bored kids. I was like, yeah, but some of us are adults.
I did wonder for a while whether it's what I'm really experiencing or whether it's autism and CPTSD, wondering with an open mind. I actually dug out my old school reports the other day, and they're full of things like Charlotte would do really well. She's got great potential if only she would do all of the work and not just the bit she's interested in, and wouldn't stare out of the window at the boys playing football and things like that. So I do have the history that goes right back to primary school, but certainly my neurology has changed since losing my son and my CPTSD coming back, because I did have that earlier in life and it was treated and it's come back. And yeah, it's a mess in there. But I think you don't have to choose between, is this ADHD, the neurodevelopmental difference, or is it autism and trauma? It can easily be all three. What is helpful to know, though, is the effect of ADHD medication. If I got an ADHD diagnosis and took the medication and didn't feel any better for it, I'd probably think maybe it was never ADHD.
Or you're on the wrong medication, which is Matt's other drum he beats is non-stimulant meds. Because there are options out there. And then I had Joe Packon, who's all about drug-free ADHD. Do exercise and have cold plunges.
I've been doing that for many years.
I can't think of anything worse than exercise.
Oh yeah.
I'd much rather walk to Greg's than do exercise.
I'd rather run 20 miles than have a cold plunge, to be honest.
Well,
something about me really likes the moving scenery and the bird song, and I think the left right tapping thing is a little bit like the tapping therapy that you get as well. So it's
while sitting here fiddling with things. This is I've been sitting here playing with this bracelet. I don't know if your laptop's been picking up the noise. So I've got a fidget cube as well.
Fidget cube,
and my biggest bugbear is that I normally end up with ink on my thumb. See, that one's bluer, because I keep unscrewing lids to pens. Anyway, or blue tack, but I've moved all the blue tack because that's just a mess.
Our local school that all four of our kids went to, they don't like fidget toys there very much. So they're like, oh, just play with a bit of blue tack, nobody will notice that way. Yeah. A, that's not as good, and B, stop treating it like some shameful thing you've got to hide.
It's really funny thinking back to primary school. My year 5 and 6 teacher, Mr. Walker. Everybody called him Colin, but his real name was Percy. Anyway, he would always play with blue tack, like the whole lesson. He was just always with blue tack. And
One of us.
being dyslexic, I'd write out sound effects in stories. And I remember him reading aloud people's stories and then mocking me because I wrote out sound effects in my stories.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite painful. It's amazing how like little, 2 minutes of something that happened 30 years ago is like ingrained in your brain forever.
Oh yeah.
When my geography teacher saw me at my GCSE results day and kind of tutted when I got a B in geography, because he was like,
oh, did you have the potential to get an A? Yeah.
You could have done better. And I was like, well, did I?
I was such a fiddler in school. I clearly remember when I was about 10, I was moved away from my friends because I was talking too much and sat with boys, and I unscrewed a pencil sharpener blade, said to the boy next to me, who was like a chav in a Manchester United football top, that's my memory, look how sharp this is, I can slash my thumb and it will bleed. And he's like, don't be silly, it's only a pencil sharpener blade. So I did, and it did, and he was like, no, give me that. And he did it as well, and so did the boy the other side, and we all got marched off to the headmaster's office and given a bollocking. And
so I remember writing lines in front of the head teacher's office just because I unscrewed the pencil sharpener. I didn't do anything with the blade.
Writing
lines, I just took it apart.
What a cool punishment for a dyslexic child.
I remember having to write lines because I think I was in year 1 or 2 and I was doing something, and the teacher called me like twice but didn't get the response. And on the third time, I was like, what? And apparently that was being so rude that I had to go and see the head teacher.
Yeah. Our boys got called rude by teachers a few times, and even though they knew they were autistic, and it's really not acceptable.
So since we're both have a HR bent, one of the other conversations that I have toyed with is behavioral frameworks within organizations, and whether or not we should be holding everybody to the same behavioral standard. Because some people are more impulsive, some people are more direct. So is fair the right word? Oh, let's use it. Is it fair to hold everybody to the same standard if that standard is a neuronormative standard?
I don't, I'm reappraising my view of the word behavior at all, because I've been playing with this in my mind, and when I see parents or teachers talking about kids misbehaving or kids with behavior issues, what I'm starting to see is kids reacting. Those are not behaviors, they're reactions. And especially if it's something like, say, you book a day off work to take your anxious neurodivergent kid to a theme park, but all they do is kick off and have tantrums, and you say that they've been badly behaved and they've wasted money and wasted your day off work and things. And no, what they're doing is reacting to you putting pressure on them to enjoy something that's really quite a stressful experience with a lot of crowds and sensory hell and
routine change and yeah.
And I'm not saying never take neurodivergent kids to theme parks, but actually you need to do quite a lot. Yeah, exactly. You need to gently prepare them for what they're going to find there, and then if it's too much, remove them from it to de-escalate a bit. And if you try and show your kid a good time and they cry, not take it personally, which is quite difficult for parents who might have ADHD themselves and rejection sensitive dysphoria. They're trying to make memories and have quality time with their kids, and their kids are kicking off, and yeah, they can really take it personally. So where's the behavior there? All I see is people trying to do their best and loving each other, but reacting and getting overwhelmed.
So I'm of the Young and Rogers needs-based behavior school. So everything we do is to fulfill our own needs. Everything. Mother Teresa was a very giving person because she got fulfillment from it. She didn't do it because she wanted to love everybody. That was her only purpose in life. She was doing it because she felt value and respect and community and love and connection from being of service. I think that there is no true selfless person because everything we do is to look after ourselves. And from that lens, the way that we act, rather than calling them behaviors, come back to that psychological safety piece, come back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And actually, I don't feel safe here, so I'm going to do what I can to get people's attention, to get me out here because I don't feel safe. And that might be because there's a loud noise over there, or there's too many people, or I was expecting not to be here because my routine is at 10 o'clock in the morning I go and do this thing. And just having some space and care and compassion about the person saying or doing something for a reason. And the more we can give space to that and understand that, the easier it is for us to then deal with, process, understand and move forward. And there's so many people that will label somebody as a problem rather than understand what's really going on.
Yes, definitely.
I haven't been diagnosed with oppositional defiance, but I've been called a devil's advocate for 30
years. You don't like being
years.
told what to do, though, do you?
I also
yeah, I've noticed that.
It depends. It depends on what the question. Anyway, so am I argumentative or am I asking a question to get a better understanding of what's going on?
Yeah.
I was listening to the news today about. I can't even remember what it was about. But I was like, but why wouldn't you just do this other thing? Because I'm problem solving in my head and coming up with the counterpoint to the news. The news can't hear my point, but my brain's like, yeah, well, they're obviously an idiot because of reasons. It's quite a lot of effort to mask and cover up that whole conversation of maybe you should or shouldn't be sharing, oversharing, discussing, being tactful in.
I can't not.
how you raise that challenge.
Yeah.
I effectively lost my last job because I asked somebody for a project.
Oh yeah.
It's just
yeah. That's one of the things that was going wrong in that job I had. That you ever seen the film Encanto? And there's the character Bruno, who knows something's awful is going to happen, and he tries to tell people and they won't listen, and he's shunned, and they eventually realize he was right all along. I so identify with that character. Just know when I know that leaders have made a decision that is going to cause more harm than good, and they won't listen. I just can't cope with that. It's they're like, let it go, you've said your piece, we've listened to what you've had to say, we are pulling rank.
Well, so
I can't cope with that.
I think there's a difference between listening and hearing.
Yeah.
I was like, you might have listened to the words that came out of my mouth, but have you actually thought about them, considered them, and then decided that they weren't worthy acting on?
It's usually a one-page summary in my case. If I'm arguing with somebody and they're not hearing me, I will go away and write a really compelling, like a a front page article from a newspaper, it will have a headline and then my argument and then a conclusion wrapping it up. Try and keep it to one side of A4 and make it so compelling they can't argue. But if they're enough of an arrogant tosspot, or they really think they know better than me about something I'm generally more expert in, then they won't listen.
Yeah, and you know, again, going back to Young and Rogers, they're doing that because they have a need to fulfill, and what they think their need isn't the need that you're seeing. So you could be seeing, you know, the harmonious community of the organization in 5 years' time, and they're seeing their shareholder meeting in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah. Or their ego being bruised if they have to make a U-turn. Yeah. But if you've got anything else you wanted to talk about,
I can fully believe that we could talk forever about all kinds of fun.
Sometimes I get involved in some infighting and then think, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. I'm not even part of this conversation. This isn't my circus, and I just try and extricate myself. And then people drag me in because I once had an opinion, and trying to get away from that.
It's amazing how divisive the neurodiversity community is.
Yeah.
One, it's not a community.
No, it's a too broad thing to make a community out of.
And you know, there is so much difference within our labels that, it's all a little bit bonkers. But you know, I've fallen out with really prominent folk in our space.
Yeah.
Over something as silly as advocating that we use the language of the recipient. The premise of the whole post, instead of you reading the first line, was that we should have person-led language.
Yeah.
Who's arguing that we shouldn't have person-led language? Oh, 4 linguists in the world that are like, well, actually, the use of words and the nomenclature of difference is really, really important because it's valuable to 4 people. I was like, well, when somebody fills in a contact form and says, hey, Richard, can you help us with neurodiversity? They mean neurodifference.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to argue with them about the words that they've used because it's in common usage. You know, if somebody says, oh, can you get this limo? I'm not going to argue and say, no, I'm only going to go in a limousine because you don't want to use an acronym or an abbreviation.
One of the reasons I left my last job, the mental health charity, was because they used terms that I found stigmatizing, and they actually gave me a voice that I could go and talk to ERGs about being autistic and LGBT and things like that. But then when they pushed out the content on the intranet and the internet, they would change it to has autism and things like that. And so
I've got a bag
press release about me being an autistic ADHD, and they reworded it, and I ended up in a Teams meeting arguing with the director of business development, and he was like,
my old job.
Somebody saw this and they thought that we were calling you autistic, they would find that really offensive. And I'm like, I wouldn't be offended. I find the idea that the HR director thought disabled was an offensive word. I find that offensive, but she's got her right to think that.
It's frustrating that there can be so much division within a space where so many people profess to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And that's quite tricky. So part of me wanting to write this was there's no such thing as inclusivity, because everything has a bound. You're going to be prejudiced or discriminate against somebody at some point, and we have to be okay about that. You know, I went for a sales interview with an organization in the ND space, and they were like, well, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? And my response was, diversity is innate. You know, we are different. therefore diverse. And inclusion is about creating a space for people to be, share. But there's no such thing as wholly inclusive.
No.
Because if we were wholly inclusive, I'd be your husband. But you chose your husband. You discriminated against many other men to have your husband.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
I don't like
to
beer. Yeah.
discriminate against.
And I've never met you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you discriminated against people too far to
Discriminate
the east.
against people with facial hair all the time. Yeah.
And
Sensitive.
you know, the response was, yeah, I like the cut of your jib. You're able to, have difficult conversations with wit. And I'm like, cool. Then give me a job, and then they give me a job. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But you know, we can't be an open house to everyone.
No.
Because there are people in the world that we want to or need to exclude. And that might be under 18s because they're a risk to themselves and others if they're involved in stuff. I don't want an 8-year-old on a construction site driving a crane. I think that's a relatively sensible thing. I also don't want them in workhouses. That's why in the UK it's illegal for under 16s, under 13s with a permit to go and do work. At the end of our podcast, I get into a question that is there anything that we wanted to talk about today that we haven't? And then we've got 15 minutes for you to say yes or no, and then fill the gap. So feel free to fill the gap, and then I'll put this at the end of.
You're assuming
the
that
bits
my
that we're cutting out.
memory is good enough that I actually remember what
we talked about.
Yeah.
Okay, you tell me something that's really, really important to you, and I'll tell you if we haven't talked about it, and then you can talk about it.
There must be. Yeah, my brain's fried because I've had quite a few speaking events and podcasts already this week. There's a podcast coming out later that I recorded a couple of days ago about the loss of my son and the impact it had on me and how I process grief atypically.
Yeah.
And this is a topic that I've started to talk about, and I wouldn't ask people to listen to those podcasts if they're going to find it too triggering for them. But if you are able to and you want to understand more about what it's like for an autistic parent to lose their autistic child, or anybody they're close to suicide, that is there if you want to listen to it. It's a really difficult topic, and I end up really drained, and then I talk about it very matter of fact, and then sometime later it hits me, and I do have a bit of a downward spiral because of alexithymia and probably just a bit of self-protection. But yeah, this is something I've started to talk about. So if
and how long ago was it?
It was April 2019, so 4.5 years ago now, and we've just had what would have been his 20th birthday. So I made a bit of a fuss about that and painted a lot of Iggy rocks. So Iggy rocks had painted stones in his memory. So he was autistic and LGBT. So I quite often do LGBT affirming, like pride flags, or neurodiversity and autism affirming slogans and logos. Put hashtag Iggy rocks on the back and leave them around for people to find. And then they can go onto social media and find out more about his story. Or maybe it just makes them smile and they take them home and they decorate their shelves. It really doesn't matter, but it just makes me feel like I'm doing something that's a creative outlet. And I'm off to one of my kids' youth club tonight to teach them how to do that. And I will talk a bit about the neurodiversity paradigm there, because a lot of kids at youth clubs, they are looking for community where they're a bit weird, or maybe autistic or ADHD or both at school, and they go to youth club to find friends outside of school. So they do really lap up the neurodiversity paradigm and the fact that we're not defective, we're different, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So that, yeah, that's the sort of final words.
Thanks for sharing. It's a really hard-hitting subject. Any conversation of loss is.
It is. And
and-
one more thing, actually, it's one of the reasons I'm a bit cynical and more moderate rather than happy flappy neurodiversity evangelist. The same April that I was quite newly diagnosed, and I was doing presentations about how great it is to be autistic and how valuable neurodivergent people are in the workplace. That same week is the week that my son was Googling how to cope with being autistic and how to quickly and painlessly end my life. So it was the Friday of the Autism Acceptance Week where I did a number of talks. So if there's anything that's going to make you feel a bit cynical and remember about the dark clouds, not just the silver linings, it's that. So that's not a very upbeat message.
Well, so my upbeat message is, your little stones of sunshine.
Yes.
So my son's not been very well recently, so I'm taking him to and from sixth form instead of him getting the bus. And somebody has graffitied on the wall as I turn right onto the road near his school. And it says on the wall, "Hi, I hope you're having a great day. Love X."
Oh, that's nice.
And I was like, it's just a little stone of sunshine.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to drive past that and go,
different is okay. Yeah. And I mean, the Samaritans, I did a 30 Rocks for the Samaritans with things like "You Are Not Alone" and "Keep Going" and things, but things that are particularly pertinent to Iggy. So the neurodiversity infinity symbol with rainbow, and then "different is okay," a double rainbow, things like that. Right. Check out the hashtag "different is okay."
Fantastic. So my last question is, where can people find you? Where do you want people to look at you and stuff?
I've got a company page on LinkedIn, which is quite new. So I've only got not even 1,000 followers on there yet. You look up Ausome Charlie, and my personal LinkedIn is Ausome Charlie as well. But you can also find me on YouTube under Ausome Charlie, and Twitter and everywhere else as well.
Bam. And I will grab some links and throw them in the description of
Brilliant.
This.
And
so people can
for stuff specifically about the double rainbow and the work that I do in memory of Iggy to promote acceptance and inclusion of young people on the double rainbow of autism and LGBT, you look at the Aim for the Rainbow website.
Yeah.
And they're on Facebook and Twitter and everything as well. So I'll give you that link as well.
That's brilliant. Well, thanks very much for spending an hour and a half with me to talk about all kinds of things from trauma and loss, psychological safety, actions, behaviors, and reactions, and the power of language.
Good talk. I enjoyed that.
Good. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.